Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game SO. Tarek and I got a fun, exciting, and unexpected episode for you guys this evening because as of a few days ago, there is a brand new Sega Saturn emulator out there on GitHub. This is developed by Striker X3 and it is called Ymir. I'm going to call it Ymir because that's how I think it's pronounced, but I'm really not quite sure. But it's not every day you get a brand new from the ground up emulator released, and it seems like Sega Saturn's been having such a hot 2024 and 2025 between FPGA cores and translations. It's no surprise that we have a new emulator as well, and even if this is still in development, it's showing absolute amazing progress. And again, if you want to take some guesses on how to pronounce Ymir, go ahead and leave me a comment down below. But obviously Sega Saturn emulation has existed. We have Mednafen, we have stuff like Yaba Sanshiro, but honestly getting a third option is great for the community, and I will say even in its alpha state, the overall menu system and the options and the usability of this I think are going to go a long way to opening up Sega Saturn emulation for a lot more people, because even if Mednafen is still the gold standard as far as emulation is concerned, unless you have a GUI, it can be very difficult to deal with in the command line emulator options, and even then the GUI is a little bit touchy sometimes. So honestly, having a very nice UI with Sega Saturn emulation is going to be awesome. But do be aware, if you want to use this and test it out today, it is only at 0.12 as far as the release schedule is concerned. So for every game like Sega Rally, which is going to emulate relatively well, you're going to get games that just completely do not work whatsoever right now. Think of this like the early days of the Sega Saturn FPGA core on MiSTer FPGA, when you'd have graphical glitches and you'd have games that just don't work. But testing and going over to GitHub and opening up issue tickets to help the emulation developer know where these issues are, I'm sure will go a long way towards actually getting this thing developed and buttoned up. Just remember, if you issue a ticket, be nice about it, especially if I sent you over. But honestly, what I'm seeing so far is just absolutely outstanding, and it is so impressive to see the Sega Saturn emulated in a new program. Because it's one of the things, for the longest time, Saturn emulation just did not work much whatsoever. If you take a look at the feature set, it's going to be pretty much standard, but I appreciate that it does the automatic BIOS detection depending on what region game you're loading. So whatever game you throw in, if it's Japanese, it'll automatically detect the Japanese BIOS. If it's United States or if it's a PAL territory, it'll grab that as well. And it also has rewinding features as far as the gameplay are concerned, and that is going to be a very nice thing for a lot of people to have. But moving over to another game that pretty much everyone knows what it's supposed to look like, Nights into Dreams. The other reason I'm featuring this is it does use the analog control. I'll go over some of the options in a bit, including the analog dead zone adjustments, which I love having in an emulator to really be able to dial in the feel depending on what controller you're using. But honestly, this looks pretty buttoned up. There's definitely a little bit of weirdness going on here and there if you pixel peep, especially in some of those effects behind Nights, but otherwise, the fact that this is so early in development and showing so much promise already really is a great thing. You can tell the developer here has got a good handle on how Sega Saturn operates, and I'm sure there's still some calls to the hardware VDP 1 and 2 as well as the dual Hitachi SH2s that might not be incorporated into the emulator yet, but I'm sure those will come. And again, it feels part and parcel exactly like it was when we were previewing the very early cores on MiSTer FPGA, where there'd just be some functions or some graphical effects that wouldn't be in the core whatsoever. But just seeing Nights kind of bop around the screen here in a new emulator, it's every bit as fun as actually seeing the game run for the first time, because I totally get excited about these innovations in technology and emulation, and based upon the views, you guys do too as well. But I'm kind of curious, leave me a comment down below and tell me, do you emulate Saturn, and if so, which one do you use? And you'll see here, as far as the usage is concerned, it's very easy to install. I'll show you how to do it in just a moment, but you'll just click the releases page to grab the actual release. And as far as 0.1.2 is concerned, you're going to have improvements in all of the different key bindings, as well as some stability fixes and some other quality of life improvements. But honestly, this is so easy to bind controls, way easier than Mednafen in my opinion, and getting the analog dead zone adjustments here, you'll see here left stick, right stick, is just an absolutely awesome thing to be able to do, because honestly in Mednafen, when I calibrate analog, I do seem to have a little bit too much of a twitchy feel in the games that use the analog controller, but that's because I'm using an Xbox Series X controller, so everything is different. Having those incorporated in as far as changes are concerned is going to be great. And as far as the sound quality is concerned, at least on Nights, it sounds very close to the original. Go ahead and listen for 45 seconds and I'll be right back with more. mean, honestly, at this point in time, it already sounds spectacular, and I'm sure it's just going to get better. And as far as the features and improvements of this build, which is still quite early, you have all of those rebind configurations, all of those analog dead zones, as well as just some stability issue improvements. Now, as far as what version you should download, read that text right there. But if you have a modern system, especially Windows, you're probably going to have the AVX2 instruction set. It is just something that is built into the CPU. So honestly, if you have something that isn't a potato, I would just grab the AVX version of the actual executable, and it isn't an installation. You're just going to find a zip file. It'll run from wherever you run it from. I made a folder here just for the test, so go ahead and unzip that wherever you want, and when you actually go into the program, you're just going to see the executable. I want you to run this first, because when you run it, it's going to auto-populate the actual folder with all of the other folders that are going to be required to actually get games running. Is when you execute it the first time and then close it, you're going to get the ROMs folder, and in IPL, you're going to put all of the different diverse BIOS files that you own legally, of course, from the Sega Saturn in here. So if you have stuff like Japanese, PAL, and European territories, US territories, that's where all of the BIOS go. And the second time that you actually load up the emulator, it is going to automatically ingest those and put you right at the set language and time settings menu. It is very efficient, and it basically holds your hand and takes care of everything for you in all of the best ways possible. I would say that as far as the UI and user experience is concerned on this emulator, it has been very well considered. Obviously, file load disk image is how you're going to load up those disks, and the GitHub page tells you all of the different formats you have. Then you're going to have a couple different tabs here for emulation, for view, and for system, but in settings is really where everything is going to come alive. So I want to go over some of those with you. This isn't really a quote-unquote tutorial because it is still early, but if you want to get going with this, I will help you out. As far as general is concerned, I would just leave everything as is. That seems to have the best success, and big thanks to the moderator of my Discord, the Cool Pup, for helping me with some of the gameplay captures as well. Go through the hotkeys and find out everything that's going on here, and as far as system is concerned, auto detect region, just leave that on. That's going to go ahead and pick the right BIOS for every single game you load up. So you may as well let the emulator do all the work for you, and if it doesn't find any BIOS files, that means they're either incorrect as far as the checksum is concerned, or they're bad files, because honestly it just worked for me. You can force integer scaling as well if that's something you're into, but otherwise I would leave pretty much everything else as is. It's going to render the best results. Then moving on to another game that's tested and working relatively well, but it has a little bit of slowdown, is Radiant Silvergun. But honestly, it's one of the best shmups on the Sega Saturn, one of the best shmups ever made, and it is a really good test case, not just because it's such a good game, but it's also a game that's given previous emulators as well as the MiSTer FPGA core a bunch of hell as far as actually freezing when you take control. But I'm going to go ahead and do the second soundtrack sample while you watch some gameplay, but look for some slowdowns in here because you might notice a few that wouldn't be in the actual game on real Sega Saturn hardware, but again, still early days and still impressive. Here's the music, and I'll be right back with more.
船のエネルギー、食料が底をつき始めたため、我々はいやおうなしに地上へ降りなければならなくなる。この宇宙巡洋艦テトラが新型戦闘機3機を搭載しているとはいえ、今回の機関が大きな賭けであることに違いはない。正面からの戦闘はできる限り避けねばならぬのだが。
I mean, honestly, that sounds really close to what a real Sega Saturn console would do, or what a MiSTer FPGA core or Mednafen would do as well. And as far, again, as compatibility is concerned, it's going to be completely hit or miss at this point in time because it's still the early days. But getting another Sega Saturn emulator on the market is going to be awesome. And again, I absolutely love the UI on this one and just how easy it is for the user to understand what they're doing, what they're changing, and how to change it. I would say from Mednafen to Yaba Sanshiro to this emulator right here, Ymir, as far as I'm calling it, Ymir seems to have the best UI design and the best ability to actually be able to communicate with the end user exactly what's going on and make it very easy to use. I would say Mednafen is kind of the hard end of Sega Saturn emulation, because as good as it is at emulating Sega Saturn, it does take a little bit of a learning curve to get used to it and get everything out of it. So if something like Ymir here, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, I'll find out soon, if that makes it easier for people to get into Sega Saturn, that's going to be an absolutely outstanding thing. And again, it's not like new emulators for classic systems show up all the time. Sega Saturn Emulation has been pretty not stagnant, but just overall encapsulated into 2 emulators and the FPGA core, so having a third emulator on an options list, especially one that's as easy to use as this one is right now, is going to be amazing. Short of that, leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think, and the next time this updates, I'll definitely check it out. See you next time. Bye bye.